increase. So here we see our neighboring counties' number of cases. Orange County has done better because the curve, as you can see, is bending. It is not flat, however. The top portion of the curve has to become flat for the cases to stop declining, becoming zero and declining. Right now, the case numbers are still is going up. But we're doing better than our neighboring counties, if that's any consolation. Similarly, in number of deaths, Orange County has tried to manage to keep the number of deaths lower, even though in size it's much larger than San Bernardino, somewhat larger than San Bernardino and Riverside together. I'll have more to say on Orange County a little bit later. But the world has never seen anything like this. It's like we are in a coma. Everything seems unreal. In this bad dream, we don't know when that's going to be over. And you cannot help but think of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, just wondering, where are we? This is not normal. This is not cancer, and certainly is not normal, as each one of us know, confined to our home. The world is going to be a different place once we get through this as well. Now, the first impact of the shutdown of the economy was felt obviously in the stock market. Our first cases in the US were discovered in late January 23rd. But the stock market did not pay much attention to it until Italy and South
Are you interested in this? Let me get it on my computer.
Started reporting a number of cases. And then not only did we hear more about that and got more concerned, Saudi Arabia and Russia got into a fight on oil prices.
Honey,
resulting in
could you do me a favor? Could you
need to mute
read me those numbers on that piece of paper I just wrote? The meeting idea is what? 896.
And that led to a
wait, 896-0177-6013.
WHO declared this to be a global pandemic. And then President Trump indicated in late March that the episode might last till August. And that really took the stock market into a nosedive. In total, stock market was down 35% by March 23rd. When it became clear that the government will finally come up with a big package, the CARES package, to help support the economic conditions. And that's when stock market started to recover. And since then, a number of measures have been taken both by the Federal Reserve Bank and by the federal government that has allowed stock market to improve, and we're up 27%. But there's no question that we have a problem. We have a serious problem that we need to resolve, and we don't really have a good idea how we're going to tackle it and how long it might take. Now, to the credit of the Federal Reserve Bank and the federal government, and of course local and state governments, they all stepped up very quickly and took major actions to stabilize the economy, stabilize the financial markets, especially Fed, as well as support the economic conditions. Fed cut the rates down to zero, undertook a major quantitative easing program, and assured the stock market and analysts and of course households that rates are going to stay zero until needed. Not only that, they took a number of actions to support all kinds of lending, because liquidity is very important. If people cannot buy and sell bonds and assets, it creates havocs in the market, as we learned in the 2008-9 downfall. So Fed has come in a big way to support the small business loan, the big business loan, the municipal lending, just about lending. Fed decided to be a backup for that, and that helps the financial markets. At the same time, Congress and the president got together, putting their partisanship aside, and passed a number of support measures. As you know, I'll go through it very briefly and quickly. First phase was $8.3 billion for public health and social services. CDC got about $2 billion, and NIH, and international efforts at 1.6 billion. The second measure is a little bit bigger, $172 billion, family and medical leaves, Medicaid, and the SNAP stamps program and unemployment insurance. All of these measures helped, but it became very clear that this wasn't going to be enough. We needed a so-called bigger boat to support the economy. And so then we have the CARES Act, the phase 3, largest support stimulus measure in the history of the United States, $2.3 trillion. Large corporations got over $500 billion to support them. Small business under the PPP program got $350 billion under that program. Individuals, checks to individuals, $1,200 per person, depending on the level of income. And business tax cuts, unemployment insurance, health, states, a whole bunch of other agencies got support. And that was the measure that stopped the fall of the stock market and the recovery, at least in the stock market, began. But so in terms of how large this total stimulus packages were, in 2008 and 9, the total stimulus packages added up to about 6% of GDP. Now this is about more than twice as much, about 14%, 13.8%. So really unprecedented support from the government, from the Fed. And this is what is needed to keep the economy from really going off the rails. Those is already slowed down, stopped completely. But there's a short-term measure to support the economy. Now, small businesses expenses, we have estimated, is about $282 billion per month. Now, PPP provided $350 billion in the CARES Act, and that wasn't going to last long, and it went very quickly. So in the 3.5 stimulus measure, this we call 3.5 phase, another $320 billion was added, most of which has already been distributed. I'll come to that in a minute, but that has provided support to small businesses. So in 3.5, we have small business, economic injury, disaster loans, another $60 billion, hospitals got $75 billion, and testing $25 billion. Now, when it comes to individual workers, the total wage bill for individual workers is about $902 billion. And the checks that government is providing, $1,200, take care of about $300 billion of that. So the huge shortfall in the support to household, to individuals. There's a talk of a fourth measure. Nancy Pelosi has proposed a $3 trillion measure, as you probably know, heard of it. We'll see what happens. It may not be that large, but it's very likely that another measure will be passed. Everybody is asking for money. Show me the money, because we cannot survive when the economy is shut down completely. People cannot go to work. We cannot sell anything. So we will see whether the support, how far it goes in averting a disaster, but at the moment it provides a short-term support to the economy. Now, the total amount of money that has been allocated, not all of it has been dispersed. PPP, about $535 billion has been given away out of $670 billion. Emergency lending benefit, about $185. Stimulus checks, most of that have been dispersed. The rest is going out very soon, I believe, in a couple of weeks. Unemployment benefits, hospitals have not used all of their money. They haven't been, I don't know what the issue is, but they haven't been given or they haven't spent it. And states have practically used all of it, and they're asking for a lot more. So the total $3 trillion that all the stimulus packages together allocated, more than half has been dispersed, $1.8 trillion, but there's still some left. And with a short time, I think we'll be talking about the next phase. Now, who got the PPP dollars, the payroll protection plan? If you look at the states, these are the states that got more than 20% of their payroll, small business payroll, by PPP. These states got between 18 to 20%. And here we are, California, Washington, and some of the states on the East Coast. We got a little less than that. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to do with the size of the state, but given that there is still money available in the PPP, maybe we'll fare a little better than what we have done so far. I'm going to turn it over to Mira now to take it forward, and I'll come back with some local perspective. Let me just it takes a little while.
Anil, I
Stop
believe
sharing.
if you
Can
stop
you
sharing,
share?
I think I'll be okay. Yeah, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah. Can you share the screen?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Great.
Can you guys hear me okay? And can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me put it on the correct mode here. Excellent. The joys of technology. Thank you, Anil, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us over. First, I hope you and your loved ones are doing well, are staying safe and healthy. Second, let me just start by saying, just please don't shoot the messenger. Some of the data we'll share here with you today are actually paint quite a dark picture, especially in the short run. So please, that's my plea to you, don't shoot me. You've heard of Great Depression, you've heard of Great Recession. We're gonna call this the Great Disruption. I think that's actually a very apt term. And yes, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Unfortunately, recently we've ended up with very bitter and somewhat poisonous chocolate that's not only gonna make us sick for a bit, but will also leave a lingering, sort of a lingering bad taste for quite a while. And that's what we'll discuss here today. Now, of course, no one doubts that we are actually in a recession. The question is how deep and how long, right? How, in a sense, how black is this long? Now, normally, when we talk about recessions, we discuss sort of like we look at three main factors, three components, right? We look at the depth, we look at the diffusion or the breadth, and we look at the duration of it. Now, so we think that on all of these three counts, we think that this will be a relatively short recession, but a very bitter and a very nasty one. And the recovery will be very, sort of unfortunately, much slower than what most people would hope for. And that's because this pandemic, in a sense, and when you speak about the recession, this pandemic is sort of hitting both the demand and the supply side of it. So if you look at the supply side, I mean, there's no doubt that we've seen a lot of businesses close. The numbers I'm going to share here are for small businesses. For over 2 months now, pretty much all over the US, you see, small business like beauty and personal care closed 95%, leisure entertainment down by 91%, right? These are the number of businesses that have been closed, food and drink and so on, and everything else as well. I mean, so deep numbers that we've never seen before, that's because of the shutdown orders. Now, of course, this has huge implications for revenues. If you look at the revenues of these businesses, they have collapsed. They're down 86% for lodging, 50% for bars and restaurants, right? Retail is down. Now, of course, as you would expect, not all sectors are doing very badly. You got your grocery revenues are up by 41%, which is expected. Everybody's flocking to groceries. And surprisingly, or perhaps not that surprisingly, gun sales are actually up. But if you look at the shutdown itself, right? If you look at the shutdown, in a sense, during that month and a half that we stayed locked down, we probably lost about 32% of share of GDP was lost, completely lost. And if you want to translate this per month into dollar amounts, that's roughly about $580 billion a month that has been lost, almost $600 billion a month that we've been losing during that time. So this is the supply side of it, right? Completely shut down, most places shut down. Now, what started as a supply shock, though, seems to have seeped over into a demand shock. Of course, you guys have seen the numbers, and they're absolutely horrendous. Here we have unemployment claims. They were very nice, very smooth, very low, about 200,000 a week over the first 2.5 months of the year. And of course, we see huge increases since then, a total of 33.4. In fact, yesterday's numbers show that about 36 million jobs have been lost if we add those as well. So obviously we have a lot of unemployment. A lot of these jobs are probably furloughed rather than forever lost, right? So that's a difference here. But again, I'll talk in a little bit that maybe what started as temporary for some of these may become permanent. Another survey which looks at the labor force and employment shows a huge decline in labor force. We're back to the numbers that we last saw. Labor force dropped by 8 million people just in April. And last this number was seen, it was 2013. If you look at employment numbers, they look even worse. I mean, they dropped by 20 million, but again, this survey stops in mid-April, so it hasn't kind of captured the rest of the entire 35 million of jobs lost. So the new numbers coming out in June 1st, in the first week of June, are going to be much worse. If you look back at disemployment numbers, Basically, there's only, you have to go back to 1999 to get these employment numbers that you see here. Another thing is, if you look at the labor market, is that the pain is not very evenly distributed. As you would expect, there's some sectors that have been really hammered by this pandemic. At the top of the list, you see leisure and hospitality. This is the percent of job loss. Again, the numbers don't fully reflect everything because we're going to get worse in June. But leisure and hospitality has lost about almost half of its labor force, right? They've been furloughed or lost. Other services is another category. This is it's a broad category that includes things like from car mechanics to your barber shops and so on. Again, 22% of jobs either furloughed or lost. Retail trade, 13%, construction and so on. And then you see the rest of the sectors here. Of course, the most shielded are government, financial activities, and utilities. And the question is, what makes you, what makes your job more secure? And one thing that we actually learned during this pandemic is this concept of essential and non-essential jobs. So of course you have your essential workers, right? You've got your healthcare workers, your police, the grocery store, your deliveries. Couple of questionable categories. Government, actually, it is evidently 100% essential. And so are marijuana stores, and I'm not gonna gripe with that. Who are your non-essential workers, you say? Well, these are your two proud non-essential workers. And as hesitant I am of calling myself non-essential in front of my dean, that's what the government has actually deemed us as non-essential. But me and Anila make peace with it, so we're okay with being called non-essential. So obviously, we did this analysis a little bit earlier, but when this started, when the crisis started, and we saw, well, what jobs are at risk? So if you put together two categories, whether your job is essential and whether you have the ability to work remotely, we can get as close as possible to the number of jobs at risk. The reason why this exercise is still important is because, if this crisis goes any longer, we're still going to see some more job losses, right? What we've seen so far hasn't quite captured the full picture. So we did a full analysis to categorize workers as essential based on the official definition of this, and 58% of employment in the US is deemed essential. That translates to 88 million workers. The rest, 64 million, are non-essential. Now, of these, about 30% have the ability to work remotely, so that's 19 million people. So these people, we can call them safe jobs. The essential and those who can work remotely can have safe jobs. But the 70% who are non-essential and cannot work remotely, that translates to 45 million. They're still at risk. Now, remember, we've lost about 35, 36 million jobs already, but there's still some more jobs at risk. And if you look at it, again, from a sectoral perspective, if you look at leisure hospitality, they lost 8.2 million jobs, but an additional 4.5 million are still at risk. Professional services, 2.2 million are lost, another almost 6 million are still at risk. Again, this is if this still goes on. Retail, 2.5 million lost, another 5 million at risk, and these are the rest of your sectors. Now, if you look at it from a perspective of local perspective, we did this analysis for the local economy. By metro area, it seems that for the LA metro area, about 1.13 million jobs are at risk. For Orange County are 420,000. Just to give you a perspective, we lost only 157,000 jobs during the last crisis. So this is a huge number that we're facing here. And for Riverside, that's about 520,000 jobs that are actually at risk. So obviously there's no doubt that this recession is certainly very deep and very broad, both in terms of demand and supply side. But the third factor, which is real important here, is duration, how long this is going to go on. And the problem here is that, of course, the longer this goes on, the more painful it will be. Problem is the duration is unknown, right? As Dr. Fauci said, we don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. However, for our own projections, we have to make some assumptions, right? To come up with some numbers as to what's going to happen to the economy. And here's what we're assuming. So we're assuming, again, these are not controversial. This is what we hear from public officials, but we assume that the grand reopening will be sort of fitful, partial, non-synchronous, different places open at different times. We're seeing already some states opening now in May. Some will probably come back in June. And of course, this will be done under some conditions, more testing, social distancing, restriction on large gathering, and so on. In terms of the virus timeline, we're assuming, again, some kind of treatment drugs will be available by late summer, early fall, targeted antibodies by fall, but we don't expect a vaccine until probably mid-2021, and that's still kind of an optimistic scenario. Now, of course, some of the states, as I mentioned, have been reopening already, right? And if you look at the map here, we have sort of like 3 stages of it. They've been reopening in stages. We have states that have been partially reopened. We have some that are going to reopen soon. And we have those that are still under strict shutdown. So if you look at this map, 31 states are under some type of partial reopening. About 7 are about to reopen very soon. But about 12 of them are still, including California, we're still under shutdown orders. Now, if you look at this picture now, it contrasts a little bit with what we talked earlier. Now that things are reopening, if we do the same analysis for what type of GDP is still under shutdown right now, that has dropped to about 22%. So about $380 billion a month are being lost now, as opposed to in April when most states were under shutdown. Now, and it seems the interesting thing is that life seems to slowly seep in to those states that have been opening already. So if you look at open table data, which kind of keeps a tab of the restaurant dining activity. So if you look at some of the cities that have reopened, so Naples and Tampa, so Florida has lifted restrictions on dining tables, you see some activity there. I mean, it's still very depressed. Same with Houston, right? Texas is also restricted, has lifted some of the restrictions. So again, we're moving from minus 100%, we're going to minus 60%. So it's still very low activity, but life seems to be seeping back slowly. If you look, we're keeping a very close eye at Google Mobility, which tracks cell phone data. And even here we see some activity. The activity in parks has come back. And we look, however, retail and recreation, even though it's off from the bottom, we're still far, far off from being normal levels. Now, to get a sense as to what the reopening will look like, since China is about a couple of months ahead of us, it's instructive to take a look at China's experience to see where we're headed. And we actually took a look at a couple of data here. One is the production activity. This is high frequency data from Goldman Sachs. And notice that if you look at production activity, it dropped tremendously during their shutdown, but it's come back almost back to normal right now. However, the same cannot be said for consumer activity. It's still down, it's still languishing, it's still down 25% from normal levels back in January. So this means that, you know, what started out as a temporary shutdown will actually have some lingering effects. Not everything that we lost during this ice age, if you want to call it that way, will be regained back immediately. And that's because, you know, obviously the reopening is going to be sort of partial and fitful and gradual. And second, some damage is very hard to reverse right away. Take consumption, for example. We got to go all the way back to the 1950s to see huge declines of double digits. This is during that recession. There's another recession in the 1980s that was a big collapse. But this is nothing, absolutely nothing with what we've penciled in for the second quarter of this year. We're looking at almost a 30% collapse in consumer spending. Basically, you know, after we hoarded all our toilet paper, we went back home, locked our doors, and we never looked back. Now, having said that, we do think that the third quarter will be probably the best on record. There's lots of pent-up demand for services, your trip to your barber, a hair salon, a nail salon, and your favorite restaurant. There's a lot of pent-up demand for that. But even then, we don't think consumption will come back to its pre-COVID-19 levels until probably mid-2022. And there's reasons for this. One of the main reasons is that income has taken quite a hit. And even though we've had stimulus support, if you look at the numbers, there's still a hole there. So if you look at lost income, right, if in an annualized basis, and this includes households and small businesses, that comes to about $1.1 trillion. Now, the CARES Act plugged in a hole of 640. Some automatic stabilizers also kicked in, like state unemployment and so on, for another 320. And of course, also saving in taxes when you're not employed. But that still leaves a shortfall of about 190 billion, almost 200 billion. So consumers are going to be hesitant to spend going forward, given that they're uncertain about their income. Another thing is that if you look at the job losses that we've had, most people think this is temporary. Now, usually temporary layoffs they roughly average about 800,000 a month, right? But the April data that we have, 18 million people told the BLS that they think their loss of job is temporary. The problem is that maybe some of this, I mean, that's good news, but the issue is that some of these temporary layoffs may end up actually being permanent. And part of this has to do with the devastating impact that the crisis has had on businesses, right? Both large and small. So if you look at small businesses, for example, where the real carnage has been, if you look at their cash buffers, I mean, they're really low. More than 50% of small businesses say they have basically operating cash for less than 2 months. By the way, restaurants have only for 20 days. So a lot of them would probably have gone under by now. Hopefully some of the PPP support helped. Only 31% of businesses say they have 3 to 6 months. And the problem is that also that the help to small businesses may have been a little bit too little too late. So out of the 2 tranches of the PPP that Anil mentioned, 3.8 million out of 30 million small businesses have actually received help so far. And the PPP itself, both tranches of them, cover roughly about 20% of annual payroll. It lasts about 2 months. So again, aid is little. The problem is that even when we reopen, it's kind of hard to run some of these small businesses, especially the high contact one, in a 6-foot social distancing economy. It's going to be very difficult to run a restaurant at a 40% capacity. So we worry that, you know, for a lot of these small businesses, there may be no soup for us at our favorite restaurants, that maybe some of them may go out of business. And this matters a lot because small businesses employ about 48% of workers in the US, and that number is even higher in locally, it's about 52%. So this matters dramatically. Now for large corporations, there's also trouble here as well. And we mentioned this already. I mean, large corporations have huge debt levels, 74% of GDP right now. And some of this debt is actually very worrisome. Some of it is actually, about 3 trillion is in, so it's high investment grade rated, but some of it, another 3 trillion is basically in B rated debt, which is just a notch above junk. And about 1.3 trillion is in junk bonds. So the health of the corporation were in question right before this crisis, and it's certainly getting worse now. I mean, the problem is that the revenue losses in some sectors, they come up to 50, 60%. So which will probably turn this from a liquidity crisis in which we're living through into a solvency crisis. So that's certainly a huge problem. Now the question is, what is the shape of this recovery? Will it be a V shape, sort of like where we quick drop and a fast recovery, a U shape where you linger at the bottom for a while, an L shape where it's kind of a depression? Our view is that this will probably be a W-shaped recovery. So here is our GDP forecast, kind of looking as a W brought to you by letter W. So we first drop dramatically, and then we see a V-shaped recovery in the third quarter from a sort of like because of the pent-up demand, but then we sort of linger around, and we don't go back until probably 2022. In terms of growth, we see a decline of 4.3% this year, a growth of 2.2% next year. Unemployment rate will spike this quarter. The quarterly average will be 14.2%, and then again, kind of slowly coming back. But even by the end of 2021, it's still going to be high. We have an average of 8.9% this year of unemployment, 6.8% next year. Now, where does this leave us? Well, first, I thank you for not shooting me. Second, since I started with Forrest Gump, let me end on a hopeful and wishful note, also from Forrest Gump. Miracles happen every day. We do need a miracle, a medical miracle right now. So let's pray and let's hope for one. And for that, I thank you. And let me turn it over to Anil.
Thank you, Mira. Let me go back to my screen.
Can you share this? Okay, perfect.
Sure, yes.
Anil, put it back.
We want to add one other quick topic on the, can you hear me?
Just put it on the slideshow, please.
There we go. Thank you, Mira. A quick note on housing and real estate markets. We are all interested in that. As far as the housing prices are concerned, coronavirus will impact housing prices to some degree this year. They'll go down about 5%. But we see a small, slow recovery after that going forward. Commercial real estate, however, is a different story. partly because there were oversupply, prices had gone up too much, not oversupply, prices had gone up too much in the last few years. And because everybody's going online, a lot of the businesses have learned to not use offices, there may be a more permanent and deeper impact on commercial real estate prices. We can't go into the detail right now because of lack of time, but we see a more serious problem in the commercial real estate market. In our area in Southern California, housing prices were starting to go up in the early 2 months. As you can see, 7.4% in Orange County in the first 3 months of the year. But since then, we don't have the latest numbers, but I'm sure the prices are down and will continue to go down, as mentioned earlier, for the rest of this year. And now, in terms of unemployment in California, they talked about the national picture. Here are some figures for California. Initial unemployment claims, which is the weekly data, climbed to 1 million plus towards the end of March. This is the highest ever number in California, just as we saw for the nation as a whole. Since then, the numbers per week have come down, but they stay at substantially heightened levels. Now, if you look at a percentage of covered workforce that has filed claims for unemployment, as you can see, they had 2% of their normal rate, which has now jumped to 27.7, 28% at the end of April. 1 out of every 4 employees have filed a claim for unemployment insurance. A totally unprecedented scenario. Now, in Orange County in Southern California, here are the numbers for the 4 counties in Southern California. Almost 8% of Orange County's 1.6 million workforce has filed claims for unemployment. And similar number for 9% for LA County, Riverside, and San Bernardino, a little bit less. Picture is very, very similar to the nation as a whole. We will be getting actual official data in the next week or so for Orange County and other counties, and we'll know the exact scenario. But we believe that these are the percentages that we will see. If we apply the national model to Orange County, though Orange County's economic structure, industrial structure is different from the nation, but just as to provide some guidance as to which sectors are going to be affected and how badly, we apply national scenario to Orange County. And here are the top 4 sectors with the biggest losses. Leisure and hospitality is expected to lose over 100,000 jobs. Professional services, which is a big sector in Orange County, 34,000. Healthcare, retail, following the next 2 industrial sectors, and here are the rest. So overall, we estimate that if the national scenario applies to Orange County, there will be over 250,000 jobs that will be lost in Orange County. That is compared to 160 or 70,000 jobs lost throughout the Great Recession, 2008 recession. Now, of course, there was a much longer time period as well, almost 3 years. Here we're talking about only 3 months. We'll see what the actual numbers are. They're going to be pretty devastating. Now, one example of how bad the situation is, just let Disneyland, our biggest private employer in Orange County. Just compare the before and after picture, and you can see that it's a deserted place, pretty sad situation. But throughout Orange County, we see the same scenario in office from business to business, and hopefully get back to normal sooner than we were afraid that we might. But it doesn't look very good. We all experience that seeing at home. Now, businesses have, because of the trouble they have, earning revenue, have reduced payments for the borrowings, for their purchases. Accommodation and food industry, for example, the historical average for their payments is about 30%. Right now, that percentage is 50% late payments that they pay to a vendor that they buy the goods from. Manufacturing, similarly, historical leverage is under about 25%, and now it's at 40%. And retail, very similar story as well. So businesses are not earning revenue and they can't make payments, and that escalates up the chain and affects the business overall. So the financial support that the federal government and the Fed are providing essentially to enable firms to stay afloat, at least in the short period. And this recession, as Mira pointed out, duration is very important. If it's a shorter phenomenon, if we can get a handle over the virus, and at least have partial opening, can go a long way towards helping the industry. Wood Center has been conducting quarterly surveys for the last 20 years to ask business people how they feel about the coming quarter, what they expect. And we created an index called OTBX index that, as you can see, fell. We conducted this survey at the end of March to one of its lowest levels. The only period that exceeded that was 2008-9 recession. Employment, we're afraid, is going to follow a similar trend, and we have a deep fall that is we expect when the next month's numbers come out. When we asked business executives in Orange County about their profit expectations and sales and employment, it was basically a mirror image from the previous quarter. Instead of 60% of businesses expecting increase in profits, now 77% of them expect a reduction in their profits. Sales, the same scenario. 72% expect lower sales in the second quarter. And in terms of hiring, at least half the businesses in Orange County expect to fire people, let go employees in their industry. So it's not news to you, I'm sure, but it's comforting to see that our survey very early in this episode predicted these kind of actions by the industry. Now, in terms of predicting what is going to happen in Orange County and Southern California in general, the most recent phenomenon, our statistical models, by the way, are not very helpful because statistics depend on past data, and this is such an unprecedented event that this has no connection with what happened in the previous 50 years or so. So we can't do statistical model. The most recent episode is the Great Recession. Now, at the Great Recession, when it started, just before it started, unemployment rate was 5% for US and 4.4 for Orange County. During the recession, the unemployment rates doubled, 9.8% for the US and 10.1% for Orange County. It took 5 years until 2015 for the rates to get back to about 5% level, and another 5 years for the rates to come down below 4%, the robust economy that we had just at the beginning of this year. Now, given that history, what can we expect for Orange County? We believe that for the second quarter that we're in right now, the average unemployment rate will jump to 11.5%. This is average for 3 months. Actually, monthly rates for April and May will be much higher, close to 15 to 17%. We will get the data, as I said, in the next few weeks. It will still take all of next year, 2021, for unemployment in Orange County to drop to about 4.5%, 5%, and much longer before we get to 3% or so, which is the long-term average for Orange County. So in terms of averages for 2020, we expect average unemployment rate to be 7% and 5.3% for the next year. But you know, this is a phenomenon that will come out. It will be dictated by progress or rather reduction in the spread of disease. But the underlying economic strength of the county and the nation cannot be doubted. We are going to be back, and we're going to be back strong, maybe stronger than ever, because every recession provides seeds for the next expansion. And I'm confident that Orange County and Southern California, as well as the nation, will come out stronger. It'll take some time. We don't know exactly how much yet. Now, before I finish, there are two other points that I want to touch upon. One is at the state level, our budget. The governor presented budget yesterday, and as you know, that the state budget is for the coming year shows a $50 billion shortfall, and he proposed a number of measures to fill that gap. Fortunately, California has been saving money in the last few years, and a rainy day fund was created. Somebody should send a note to Jerry Brown thanking him for the hard work that he did over the last 5 years, not spending all the money that we had during the boom years in the last 4 or 5 years. In any case, the state has sufficient funds right now to tide over for the coming year with some belt-tightening here and there. That is not to say that the federal government should not support the state, as this graph shows that we will manage in the coming year with the resources that we have within the state. Also, we hear a lot about California pension liability and high debt that the state government has accumulated. Well, here is some sobering or refreshing numbers, somewhat helpful numbers for California and the rest of the states. If we add up the direct debt for the state and the pension liabilities, California is just to the left of the middle. You can see the circled. It is nowhere the worst state in the nation. It is not a state with the least amount of debt or pension, but it's a reasonable position to be in. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, that we are doing not the best possible, but not as bad as many of the other states like Illinois and New Jersey and many other states shown on the left-hand side there. The last thing, what can we do? What should the Orange County leaders and business people and all of us do to get back to work, to get the economy working, get the businesses open? Beaches have been open, at least partially. There are three things that the county needs to do. One is to have more testing. If you want to go to work, you want to make sure that you don't get sick. So you want everybody else to be healthy and you to be healthy. And the only way to find that out is by testing. We need more medical equipment and PPEs. And finally, we need to have contact tracing of some kind, because we need to find out as soon as somebody gets infected who that person is and try to isolate and not have more people get affected by that. Now, county is working on it, but sadly, the county's testing rate is much lower than the capacity. And hopefully this will get better. But there is a way for county to start moving forward. That is not to say that we should give up our privacy and we should not have government, we don't want the government intervening in our private lives. But these are extraordinary times. And so it's only by working together and finding a path forward, we can help in the economy and individual. So this is our presentation. I'm going to stop here, stop sharing my screen, and turn it back to Ed.
Thank you, Anil and Mira. We really appreciate your insight, and wasn't always the best of news, but I don't think any of us were too surprised by a lot of what we heard as well. I'm going to open it up. If anybody has questions, I think you're all muted at this point, but if you want to unmute yourself if you have a question, I've got a couple, but I'm going to defer to the audience. So if you want to unmute and just tell us your name and your question, if you have any, go right ahead. All right, well, I'll throw mine out while we're waiting. So as we're thinking about the potential upturn, I know we keep getting news about extensions on shutdowns and so forth. I'm just curious what you think is, who's the lead car in the roller coaster that eventually will probably go back up the hill first as we start to turn and maybe start going back to work more and more. Are there industries or jobs or what have you that you foresee will be kind of the first ones to recover?
Yeah, Anil, you want to take it or you want me to? So there certainly are some industries that are that never shut down, right? Obviously the essentials and so on. In terms of the industry, we see manufacturing go back a bit sooner. I mean, they've already opened, other than Tesla, but they've actually opened. Car companies have started to open. Even Michigan has allowed return of production in those places, of course, under very strict restrictions and so on. So we do expect manufacturing. We also expect construction to come back sooner than others. And that's partially because construction is used to these like major disruptions. So they're probably better geared to start back up and start back sooner. Healthcare will also pick up. Certainly healthcare has, counterintuitively, they've lost jobs. I mean, they've lost 2.2 million jobs so far, and probably more will come in a national level. And part of that is furloughed, but part of that is roughly because hospitals shut down every other activity. Private doctors' offices were shut down, dentists and so on. So we certainly expect these people to come back. So these industries will likely lead the way. Obviously, the laggard will be leisure and hospitality, travel, tourism, all your usual suspects that will probably kind of be a laggard in this whole for obvious reasons, because a socially distant economy doesn't really suit them very well.
Sure.
And education.
Yeah.
You know, we
And we're not.
we have to come back this fall, though I understand that we will be teaching Cal State Fullerton and maybe other universities also online. But I think the business of high school teaching and college and university teaching, that cannot stop. We just have to find a different way, the best way that we can possibly come up with.
Yeah.
Excuse me, you bring up a very interesting point. I just heard us now say, what can we be doing differently going forward for our own organization to recover, instead of focusing on what the government is doing, because all of us are looking to try to recover from this in the very near future.
Exactly. And I think the best thing to do is to continue to follow good practices, which is 6 feet of distance, masking, using cleaning hands, and taking every other precaution not to get sick ourselves and not to pass it on to others. Other than that, I think it's the institutional responsibility, the industry, the employers, to make sure that their place of work is as safe as possible by providing sanitization and providing space for people to maintain the distance. I think it can be done. I think we can come back in a significant way and do a lot of the work, most of the work, by following these practices, because this virus is going to be around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the rest of this year, until the vaccine is discovered, and maybe until
I'm going to guess and say
next year, until everybody is vaccinated.
Can I add
I'm guessing. Go ahead.
Let me add a couple of things to what Anil mentioned. So he mentioned complying with the governor's order, in a sense, doing more testing, contact tracing. We can discuss that later on, whether that's effective, but certainly seems to be the case that by decree. But I think there's other things that the government should be pushing and be able to actually help small businesses particularly, but even large businesses. Liability protection must be a must. I mean, it has to, otherwise no business will open unless there is liability protection in place. Government should make sure there is a there's a legally safe environment for businesses to open, and that's not the case yet.
Right.
No small business will open. No business will open if you under the fear that you can be sued at any moment. There's already 770 lawsuits in the legal system right now related to COVID-19, suing businesses and healthcare and hospitals. There is some protection in place for hospitals, but it should be extended to all other businesses. Again, within reasonable limitations, because you don't want the business to abuse that. But certainly that's to me, that's key. That's more key than testing if you want to come back. Second, obviously, I think other things that government can get a bit more creative and offer things like, if you have to rework your space of work to make it safe for your employees and your consumers, there's a lot the government can do, whether it's state government, whether it's federal government. They can give you a good idea would be to consider tax credits if you spend money to reorganize your space to make it safe for your customers, because that costs money as well. So they can be a bit more creative to help businesses come back. But I think the onus is on the state, local, and federal government to make these provisions available so small businesses can open up and can come back. Otherwise, there's not going to be an economy to come back to if this continues like this. And
What I was getting at.
the third thing,
go ahead, continue.
some of the requirements seem to be overly onerous. I mean, some of the, you hear the mayor of LA saying we can never reopen until there's a cure. You hear that, we cannot reopen until you have 0 deaths for 14 days. I mean, come on, we have to be realistic here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try again. What I was getting at was, I get the impression from what Ed was saying that there are entities going on at Cal State Fullerton that are making some adjustments on things that they can do differently so that they can start to recover regardless of restrictions. They're trying to work within those. Thus, this Zoom call today. Am I off on that, Ed?
I'm probably the last person on this call to talk to that, but just what I see, I mean, there's a lot of transition that our president of our university was on CNN the other day, and he was asked a question about, why are we making announcements this early in the year about, classes being online in the fall? And I loved his answer. And that's not just because his wife's on the line and others as well, but I liked how he responded. He said, it's better that we be prepared. It's much easier to go from an online environment that we're currently in to an in-person event. I mean, an announcement could be made today. We could be back in the classroom on Monday. It's a lot harder to transition from the in-person where we were in the beginning of March. It's taken some time. A lot of us are still not adjusted to this online world that we're in.
And it provides hope for the future.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the better safe than sorry. We've been saying, my wife and I and others have been saying since day one of this, it's better that we err on the side of caution than on the side of careless. And I think that I'm proud of the fact that I work for an institution that is constantly on the side of caution with this. You know, I've done the numbers in my head and thought, okay, if we have 40,000 employee or 40,000 students and another 10,000 faculty and staff, on any given day, we have 50,000 people on campus. If you just run percentages and do the math and go down to the lowest number, that would be about 2,000 people dying that I work with, and that's not acceptable. And
yeah, but see, what's going on now is you're starting to provide more and more services that are remote access.
Sure.
And as a result, I know we're wounded, but we're not stopped. We're still moving forward. And again, I compliment you for doing this.
What I like is Mira talked about the W as well. We're going to go down, we're going to go up, we're going to go down, we're going to go back up. And so, you know, that new normal everybody keeps talking about doesn't really, the way things were 3 months ago, that's not where we're going to be. But again, I'm not the economist. I have a question for Anil or for Mira. Anil, you've been in Orange County for a lot of years. You've been in your role of some semblance of your role in economics. I'd just be curious, a lot of us are shocked at what's been going on over the last 3 months. What has surprised you? I'm just curious. I've known you for 9 years. What has surprised you through all of this, if anything?
Well, the resilience of our people. I'm just looking at Cal State Fullerton and the faculty. You know, half the faculty, more than half, never had used online instruction. And look, within a matter of days, they all geared up, put their classes online. Students all made the changes, and instruction continued. And I think the way population in general has responded to the virus in terms of isolation, in terms of personal hygiene, and how quickly that we responded once we realized the significance of what was going on. I don't know if that is true in a lot of other countries. I think there's a lot more coercive actions that had to be taken in South Korea and other places. Or people just were lackadaisical and they didn't pay attention to it, like in maybe Italy. So I think I'm very impressed with the way population at large has taken the responsibility in their own hands and took action that needed to be taken.
Thank you. We're up against the hour, but if there's anybody else that has any questions, I'm going to stay silent for a couple seconds here and see if anybody wants to jump in.
I have a question, Ed.
Thanks, Sally.
Why is it that the government has the right to choose what is considered what they feel is necessity and what is not, just like liquor? Why is liquor
Or marijuana.
Yeah, exactly.
exactly
Yeah.
something that they consider that they can get away with, whereas two people can't go to a church? And they really, really put down churches. And I just don't understand why you can have 50 people in a liquor store, but you can't put 2 people in a church. Is there anybody that can explain that to me?
I think Mira is your question.
I won't take a crack at that one. Yeah.
No, look, I'll take a crack at that one. No, that's what happens when obviously you have this this sort of like by decree orders, right? I mean, government chooses winners and losers. It's an unfortunate thing. And for some of us who have been a bit opposed to the way this has been handled, I completely see your point in this. It's a very capricious sort of order to do. Obviously, you're going to see a lot of litigation. We've seen a lot of lawsuits come up already, and the courts have weighed in on that. So I think a lot of these unfortunately will end up in court, because when you have this, you know, government picking winners and losers, we as economists are very uncomfortable. I personally am very uncomfortable with that. I understand some lockdowns had to be put in place. I understand groceries and pharmacies have to be open. but then you expand it a bit more into these other esoteric areas that certainly creates issues.
I've seen the governor in South Dakota has been in the news a lot lately, the last few days, talking about, how they didn't really put in a lockdown in South Dakota. Again, it's 89 people in South Dakota as opposed to, millions here, to exaggerate. But, they really left it to the people. They said, here's what's logical. Here's what you should and shouldn't do. We're going to encourage you to do curbside takeout. We're going to encourage you to be 6 feet away from people. We're not going to tell you what you have to do. And again, we're more of a melting pot in the other states than you get in South Dakota, probably, and that's why that worked there. It may not work here. But no, Sally, it's a really good point. It's a great question. I think a lot of us have, without a doubt.
I think this is a real test for democracies, liberal democracies especially, where we believe that government's role is limited. It's much easier for China to implement regulations and contain the virus.
Used to it.
But it is very difficult without the support of the population in a country like ours or similar countries to have deal with it in as efficient a way as they have done. But this is the way things are. This is the way we lead our lives, and that's the way China leads their lives. And liability is a very important, very difficult issue to deal with. Businesses, whether it's businesses and churches and other places, why shouldn't people be able to go there and exercise their rights? And to what extent can we curtail those rights, even for a short duration? I don't know if there are any simple answers.
Sure. Thank you, Anil and Mira. Any other questions?
In China,
Sally.
they never had rights, but in America, we've had rights. So to
Right.
try and take someone who had independence and try and say, well, now you're going to be China, it's just, I don't see how it's going to work.
When you're right, and that's what we're used to, the freedoms that we have. And so when any of those freedoms are taken, not even taken away, but just compromised.
No, they are being taken away. Actually, they are being taken away.
Yeah. Anybody else have any further questions?
It is certainly, we're going to have this, if this continues any longer, I mean, you have issues with civil liberties. I mean, this is going to be litigated longer and longer. And again, I'm very uncomfortable with the overreach of government personally, and I know a lot of Americans are. So it is always a tough choice.
Yeah, the word I've been hearing all week this week and all the Zoom calls and phone calls I've been on has been fatigue. It feels like, 9 weeks in now. And really, when we see these now we're going to be closed for another 3 months in LA or whatever the case may be, I'm sensing a lot of fatigue.
I think the problem that people have is that in most cases, when you see some more of an anger bubbling out now, I think it's partially because it seems like the goalposts have been moved a little bit. So we were staying home to flatten the curve, which is, I think, a very noble thing to do, not to overrun the hospitals. Perhaps on hindsight, hindsight is 2020, so I don't like to criticize whether it was a good idea or not. But let's say we did the right thing. The question is, are we going to stay locked down till we have a virus vaccine? That's not possible. Are we going to stay locked down till we have a cure? I don't see how that's possible. So my thinking, or our thinking is, and me and Anil were talking about this actually yesterday, we're probably slowly moving towards a Swedish model, which never locked down in the first place, right? Because eventually you have to reopen. You can't keep it shut down for 12 months or 18 months until you hope you have a vaccine. And the goalpost, putting that as a goalpost, putting unrealistic things like a cure or like a 0 death for 14 days, I think that's what people are actually kind of rising up in anger more and more about. And I think government officials everywhere have to be very careful about that.
Let me just also add that I think that most of us, assuming there's no vaccine until next year, most of us are going to catch it, majority of us. But hopefully over a period of time, and with some medication therapies becoming available so we don't end up in hospitals, few of us, or die from that. But there is no escaping it until we have a vaccine.
Very true. Last call for questions. Well, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our panelists, Anil and Mira. I appreciate it. I know you guys gave this presentation a few weeks ago, and I know the numbers have changed a little bit since you gave it a couple weeks back, but I appreciate you taking the time on a Friday afternoon to to share with us. And I know not all the news has been fantastic, but certainly we all are in this. I hear everybody say, and I love this phrase, that we're all in this together, but we're going through it uniquely and individually, because how I go through it is different than how my wife feels about things on this. And the key is for us to just be supportive of one another. And that's why we do these calls every week. You know, sometimes it's just no agenda and we get together and it's just a therapy session. Who wants to talk? What's on your mind? And we'll do it again next Friday. And we always say we'll continue to do these calls. Yeah, we'll continue to do these calls until my wife and I log into Zoom on a Friday at 1 o'clock and no one's there. But as long as there's one person there, we're going to keep doing these every week because we just want to have an opportunity for people to share. So thank you for sharing today and for being, you know, the voice of reality for us on this. It's nice to, even though it's not wonderful to hear what we hear sometimes, it's nice to hear it. And it's nice to hear that, you know, we're not all going insane. So Mira and Anil, thank you. Morteza, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ed. I just want to end with what
Yes.
Warren Buffett said, never bet against America. So let's end on a positive note.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll be back.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, I
We'll be
like
back.
that slide. We'll be back. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all. I did
Thank you.
record this. If anybody'd like a copy, I'll check with Mira and Anil first if it's okay. If it is,
Yeah,
then I can
sure.
send it out one off to anybody that like it. So have a wonderful weekend and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.